Welcome to Cava Conversation. I am Ria. I'm your host right here on Yachting International Radio, and I am pleased to introduce my guest today, Dr. James Rieley. How are you?
I'm incredibly good, Ria. How are you?
Very well, thank you. But I got a glimpse of what's outside your window today, and I think you're doing probably just a little bit better than I am.
Life is full of choices, Ria.
Yes, it is. Well, yeah, your choices seem to be doing very well for you at the moment.
Yes, it is. The weather on this island is pretty exceptional. I've been here on this island for over a year now, and every day, literally every day, the temperature is either 27, 28, 29, or 30.
And a lot of sunshine.
Well, yeah, and it does rain. Yesterday it just bucketed for almost 10 minutes. And then the sun comes out and things dry off in 5 or 6 minutes. So.
Right. That's a rough life, you poor thing.
It is a rough life for you.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Let's sort of introduce you. Where are you a lot of people, especially in the New York area, and around the world know who you are. But for those that don't know who you are, could you please just give us a little bit of information, where you're from, where you spent the majority of your life, and why you speak with an American accent?
That part again, right? I was raised in the middle of the United States, well, the northern middle of the United States, in the state of Wisconsin, and I lived there for 52 years, and then it's kind of crazy. So I went to school and had a family there, and life just went on for a long time. Owned a business there for 24 years. And then I sold the business and retired, and then ended up being headhunted after a little while and went to London. And I'm a British citizen, but being 52 years in the United States, this does kind of attach itself to your voice. Lived in the UK for a while, moved to Spain, spent 3 years living in Barcelona on a sailboat, and then one day I moved to Mallorca, sailed the boat to Mallorca, which was easy because it's dead south and it's about a 20-hour sail. And my plan was to spend maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks in Mallorca just to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I lived there for 16 or 17 years. I sold the boat, and I bought a home in a village of 1,500 people. And I was just in heaven. And then I started dating this woman who I had actually been married to for 10 years. And then we had been divorced for a little over 10 years. And then we started seeing each other again. And she's an American, and she was doing all the travel. She'd be coming to Spain all the time because I did not like going to the United States. And I thought, well, after about 5 years of this, because I like this relationship going forward, I thought, well, I should be able to do something to make this easier, to make the relationship get better and better. I'm not going to move to the United States, even though she has an adorable little home in the middle of a little lake thing. So I moved to the British Virgin Islands and became a legal resident there. And I lived there for several years. And then because of a little hurricane issue, I ended up coming to Antigua in the British West Indies. And here I am.
Well, speaking of a little hurricane issue, not such a little hurricane issue, that was one of the biggies, Hurricane Irma, that smashed into you. You were living on your boat at the time, weren't you?
Exactly. It was the largest hurricane on record to come across the Atlantic. And as it came closer and closer, we were all of us that are boaters on our boats were paying very close attention to what the forecasts were. And I think it was 3 or 4 days before it actually hit, we were hearing messages that it could possibly come within 200 miles to the north of Tortola, where I had the boat at the time. And so I'm talking to locals, and saying, so 200 miles away, what is this going to mean? Because I've never been in one of these, so I have no frame of reference. And I would hear things like, well, we're going to get wet because this is a seriously large hurricane, James, and the boat's going to get chucked around a lot, so really lash this sucker down. The next day, the forecast says, well, it could. Now, I mean, the word could is really important here. It could pass within a little bit less than 100 miles. And I'm thinking, well, if we're going to get seriously wet and seriously pushed around at 200 miles, this is going to be worse. The day after that, the forecast no longer had could in it. Now the forecast was saying it will probably pass within 13 miles.
Ooh.
And in hurricane terms, that means you're whatever the word that you choose to use here, because I don't think we can say the fucked word. Which so the night before it arrived, I actually got off the boat, lashed it down as best possible, and I went to a hotel in this marina, which was Nanny Key in the west end of Tortola. Nanny Key is a registered or recognized hurricane hole, so it's always been safe. I went to this hotel. The next morning I woke up and there was no electricity. And I thought, well, of course, it's a hurricane. And I looked out the window and thought, wow, look at that rain. It's at a big angle. And then after a couple hours, you start seeing bushes and small trees going past, and they keep getting bigger and bigger. And finally, it became apparent I should not be looking out the window because if one of these hits the glass, that could be a problem. Then I had a terrace that had two big French-type doors. They blew open, so I had to lash them shut and pile furniture in front. Then the roof started to come off, and I had to leave the hotel room.
And this was your safety zone away from the boat.
Yeah. It's kind of like going from hell to hell. And over time, I did manage to make it to a condominium, and the man that was living in the condominium managed to see my hand as I'm trying to pound on his door. I could not hear myself pounding because the roar of this thing is so much. And by then the water was over my knees, and it's just not good. So he brings me inside, literally saved my life. We found great irony in that because the only reason that he was aware that I was there is because when the eye of the hurricane came over, he went outside to smoke because it's not even his condominium. He's cat sitting for a mate of his.
So in this case, smoking saved a life.
Yes, and the smoke and the pack of cigarettes did say in big letters, "Smoking kills," and we thought that was quite hysterical. So I lived with he and his girlfriend for 6 days, and then finally was evacuated on a helicopter to Puerto Rico, and then got out of there just before Maria came. So it was a bad weather year, and but now I'm here, and luckily hurricanes seem to miss this island a lot. So it's green and lush, and the buildings are not destroyed. It's a very, very nice place to be.
Is that why you chose this island? Was because it was sort of notorious for being out of the pathway of hurricanes?
Pretty much so. After I had lost my boat when Irma came through, because my boat was destroyed, then for the next 10 months, I was looking for a replacement boat. And by then I was still on the island of Tortola, but living in a rented villa for a while. And I found a boat that was here in Antigua for sale, and it's like a 45-minute flight. So we flew on down here and looked at the boat. I almost tried to buy it, but then decided against it. But by then, Mary Lee, who had come down with me, she finds an estate agent, and so here I am. I'm leasing this place from an estate agent, and it's quite nice. It's very comfortable, and the boat dock is right in front of my house, and it's a good way to live.
I can imagine. It does look absolutely beautiful. But one day I hope to make it to visit. So you are an established author. You have written books in the past.
I'm told, yes.
You don't remember?
Well, the term established is interesting, but yes, I've written, I think, 9 business books,
Okay.
1 pulp novel, and then the book you're getting to.
Right. Living on Rocks, right?
That's it.
So that just came out a few months ago.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about it. What is sort of the underlying story and what was the inspiration?
When I first moved to Mallorca, I was faced with this issue of, so I've just sailed to this island, and now I'm getting rid of my boat, and I'm going to buy a house on land, and I have lots of friends and family, and everyone's always going, well, what are you doing? What's this like? And so I started sending them emails, and that kind of evolved in short order into something blog-like. Uh, and this is in 2000.
Well, it looks like we've had a little bit of a glitch. Sorry, we had a glitch there for a moment. Carry on.
So I started writing this blog-like thing, and I did 174 chapters of this blog-like thing. And then when I moved to the BVI, I started doing it again, and I had like 40 of those. And a friend of mine said to me, James, why don't you write a book about what it's like living on a boat? I mean, this is, wow, you just love doing this. And I went, well, yeah, I don't know how I'd ever do that. And they said, why don't you write a whole book about that hurricane you were in? And I said, well, I did write an article, which was published by the Islander magazine.
Yeah.
And it was like 17 pages. I don't have any clue how I could stretch it into a book. That just seemed wrong to me. And then the friend said, well, why don't you write about this island thing? I mean, you love to live on rocks. And I thought, oh, yeah, now that would be a fun thing to. Because of that, I had all those blog-like things. So it wasn't that difficult to put together. So Living on Rocks is a memoir of like 18 years of my life of living on rocks.
Nice. So it tells the story of being in Mallorca. It tells the stories of being in Tortola and the transfer over to where you are now.
Right.
And is it self-published?
Everything that happens in between. So there's a huge amount of what it's like to live in a cheesy little village of 1,500 people.
You're talking, which village are you talking about?
Puig Punyet.
Wow, okay.
Which was pretty much of a heaven-like experience.
Yeah.
When you live your life, the bulk of your life in big cities that have constant things going on, lots of technology, things are moving at very fast pace. And then you move to a village of 1,500 people in the middle of Mallorca. Boy, you experience culture shock pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But it was such a great culture shock. Every time if you're in London or even in Palma, you walk down the street and people are either in a conversation with somebody next to them, or their face is buried in their phone, or their head is down.
Mm-hmm.
You live in a little tiny village, and you walk down the street, and people who you may have seen but you've never even met, they will stop you and say, "Hello, James. How are you today? We heard you had a cold." Instead, and I'm thinking, okay, first of all, I don't know who you are, and how the hell did you know I had a cold? Well, it's a village, and everybody knows everything. And
that's actually one of the things that I really enjoyed. I mean, I think it's pretty much anywhere in the world. I've never lived in a city, but I've always lived in larger centers. And yeah, after going into the village and realizing that everybody is so friendly. I mean, everybody interacts. You go down to the local coffee shop, and if you're looking to have a coffee on your own to do something, do not go to the local coffee shop, because that's just not happening.
Right.
So, I mean, everyone stops to say hello.
Yeah. And I miss that.
Yeah.
I'm living in Jolly Harbor, which is on the leeward side of Antigua, the western side of Antigua, and and it's this huge community, and we have a huge like a supermarket here, and insurance companies, and there's everything you need. You don't really have to leave here, uh, but it's still people spend time with themselves or in very small groups, and because of the boating thing. Uh, Very shortly after I arrived, I started to meet people who have boats, and now I've got this really great group of friends, and they're here, and we get together because of that. Uh, Whereas in a village, you don't have to plan to get together because someone will just stop you and say, "Oh, good, let's talk about this."
Well, and I mean, everything that's going on in the village constantly because somebody's telling you something at some stage, and half the time it's not true, but it's interesting.
Yeah. And the other half the time, it's about you that you did not know other people know about.
Or that is something that other people made up about you because it's sort of Chinese whispers kind of idea. It went from one person to another. And by the time it got to the end, became something far different than what it originally was intended.
But for me, Ria, it was all good things because I'm such a good boy.
Of course. Yes. We know you're
Yeah.
such a good boy, James.
Okay.
You're one of the original troublemakers. Don't even be going there. I know better.
Okay.
So what is next for you now that you've written this book and you've got it for sale, sorry, on Amazon? I wanted to sort of clarify that. It's on Amazon?
It's on Amazon, and it's been selling quite well. It's being reviewed, and the reviews are really good. Uh, since we published that, I've written two more books, but they're on leadership, and I wrote them as essays, and the reason I wrote them in essays, when you look at business books, typically business books are X amount of pages, and to really get the concept of what this book is all about, you got to go all the way to the end of the book, and then light bulbs come on. And as a retired businessman and somebody who advises the CEOs of big companies, I thought, well, this is kind of annoying. So what I'll do is I'll write it as a series of small essays. And each one of these essays is maybe 2 to 3 pages long. So you can read it in 5 or 6 minutes. And I wanted to do it that way so you can actually learn things, learn to do things differently in a very short block of time. So it's a perfect book if you're between meetings, or if you're in the tube, or in a subway in the United States, or in a car. You can always find 5 or 6 minutes.
If you're in a car, I think you should probably be watching the road.
But if you're a big business person, someone else is driving it for you. So I've done those 2 books. So it's volume 1, volume 2. And now we're in the process of converting them to audio books.
Great.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun to record.
I can imagine. That's well, I mean, being in radio, I've done my own fair share of recording for different commercials and that sort of thing.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, even 30 seconds worth of speaking, sometimes you have to redo it 10 or 15 times over because the intonation is wrong, or you paused and taken a breath in the wrong spot, or you popped a pee, or
Sure.
yeah, there's many different things that can go wrong. So that is quite a process for sure. But it's important, I think, too, because in today's day and age, when so many people are doing podcasts and so many people are wanting to sort of have that, we're so busy. So we want to be able to listen to things on the go as we go somewhere if we're, en route, because we don't have time to sit down and read a book, as it were.
Exactly. So it made sense to be doing this. I had been told repeatedly, because you're the author, James, it should be your voice reading it because you know where the emphasis needs to be.
Yeah.
And I have 2 sons. One of them is in the music business, and he used to own a studio in Los Angeles and one in Nashville. So he told me how to set up a studio here. And so I'm doing this it's little by little.
And so you set up your studio. That's quite the undertaking, setting up a studio. I know with myself as well. I'm in an apartment, and the sound quality, we've got high ceilings and a lot of glass, and the surfaces don't absorb sound very well.
Right.
And when you're looking for good sound, you have to have so much softness all around you in order to absorb sort of the runoff. So it is difficult for sure to find a good space, and it's got to be a small space as well. If it's just for speaking, it's got to be a small space.
Right. Well, this is built into a corner with huge boards with massive thick towels draped all around.
Nice.
And I think it'll do. I've done tests of it and sent them to my son, and then he can beat me up about it. And he finally said, "Okay, this is the way you need to do it." So we're recording on that basis.
Nice. We have to take some photographs and send it to me. Maybe I can try and redo what you've done. If it's one of those patch jobs, those kind of things I can do.
You just need a lot of towels and some good electronics. That's all.
Perfect. So what is next for you? What is your plans? I mean, you've got those 2 books and sort of the essay style things. Are you said, you were mentioning to me earlier off camera that you had your boat out for hurricane season this time. You've got your boat coming back in just over a month. Are you going to be doing some sailing? Are you going to be traveling?
Well, the condo / villa that I live in here is, I had a year's lease on it, and then it's sold. And then luckily I seem to get along fine with the new owners, so I've got another 6-month lease with them. So the plan is when the boat's back in the water, then we'll go sailing, because there's just tons of Montserrat is within eyesight of here. The other side of Antigua is quite special. Guadeloupe is like a 7-hour sail, and going to Guadeloupe is like going to southern France, only seriously southern France. So we'll be doing little trips like this. And then probably in the end of March, when my lease is up, then we'll get in the boat and we'll just sail away. And we'll spend several months just sailing up and down the chain of islands. And then when summer comes, Mary Lee will go back to the United States, where she has her marvelous little home on this marvelous lake. And she spends usually 3 months there during the summer. And then I'll probably go to Spain for a while.
So you're going to come and visit us?
It's a nice place to be.
Well, that's wonderful.
You have to go check out those village people,
Yeah, no, you'll have to. Do you know what, though? I can guarantee you that however long you've been gone, you'll go back to the village, and the same little old man that was sitting in the corner of the local coffee shop will still be sitting there drinking exactly the same thing he was drinking 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Nothing will have
James, I didn't see you last week. Well.
Yeah. And you'll be like, I've been gone for 4 years. Oh, really? Yeah, no, it is what it is, right? But it's nice to have those places to go back to, because
it is.
I think sometimes when you feel like a cog that is in this great sort of wheel of life, and we tend to just blend in, to be able to go back to something like that and to have it make us feel like we are special and we are missed and we're thought of. I think it's important to have that.
And I have lots of friends, and I was told many years ago that friends are the family you get to choose.
Yes.
So the times I've been back to Mallorca just to visit, it's been very, very special.
Well, we do miss you.
Oh, thank you.
And I really am looking forward to having you come back. And I expect that maybe, actually, we can't go to Zanzibar now because they've shut down.
Really?
Yes, the last time we went for coffee was in Zanzibar, and they had a big issue in Mallorca with the terraces. And
I remember that, right.
Well, this sort of reared its ugly head not too long ago, and the law was implemented, and all of a sudden all the chairs and tables were pulled off. Zanzibar was down to, I think, something like 3 tables outside, and then they had to remove something like 50 tables inside. And as a result, they just said, you know what, we can't keep this business going. So they've shut their doors.
Wow, that's a crime.
It is. It is. Do you know, it's the one thing that really is starting to annoy me about Europe, um, is that Europe was loved and fascinating for so many of us North Americans as well, for the fact that there was such a great social scene, and it was an outdoors kind of environment, and there was, people entertaining in the streets, 365 days a year, and you
Sure.
could people watch. You would sit and have a coffee, and you would watch people walk by, and it was just really interesting. And when I first came here 15 years ago, that still was the way it was. And I'm not sure what has made that change, or who specifically has made that change over the years. Yes, it's politicians, but politicians don't come up with those things on their own. Somebody is pushing those buttons behind the scenes, as in anything political. But to see this change now, it's really quite frustrating, because they're actually taking away the heart of what makes Europe Europe.
Well, yeah. Plus, it's going to have a definite impact not only on locals but on tourists. And I remember when I was still there was an issue going on about the Spanish government, or the Mallorquin government, trying to make the conscious choice of, do we want to put a cap on the number of tourists that are allowed to come to the island, or do we want to just kind of run crazy?
Mm.
And the benefits were, if you let it run crazy and not put a cap, if you let it just keep building, it's definitely bring in more and more money. But the unintended consequence is the infrastructure takes such a major hit.
Yeah.
And if you put a cap on it, so you can save money on the infrastructure side, but you don't have the income flow. And what I found fascinating wasn't the decision they made at the time, but it's how the decision was made. And in my work with CEOs and senior management teams, it's quite clear that companies rarely get into trouble by what they do, but they always get into trouble by how they do it.
Right.
And it's the same issue with governments. It doesn't take a lot of whinging on the part of a small group of people to get politicians to put in a new policy or a new rule or a new law without really thinking through what are the unintended consequences of this. And typically, the unintended consequences, whilst they could be good, usually end up going horribly wrong.
Yeah.
And then, it takes a couple of years, and then things change again, and they switch back. And I think that's the kind of thing you'll see, because Santa Catalina, where you're talking about, they live and breathe on visitors coming.
Yeah, I mean, that whole area, it's very bohemian. It's sort of come up in the last few years. Well, I guess maybe 6 or 7 years now. It used to be, the Lanka used to be quite the very popular touristy area, and gradually that started to shift over to Santa Catalina as things changed. People started buying apartments, redoing apartments. Some of the most amazing restaurants in Palma are in that Santa Catalina area. Some great night spots. And it just really started to change. So everybody started going there, and it was great on a Saturday. You go to the market, you would have something to eat there, and you could just wander around Santa Catalina for hours, and you would run into a friend at this bar, or another friend at this coffee shop. And, everybody was sitting outside. And people were saying that, it was a noise issue after midnight. And others were saying it was because it was hard to walk down the sidewalk. Well, it's not like they have cars barreling 100 kilometers an hour down those roads, because it's impossible to do that.
Sure.
So if you have to step off the sidewalk because there's tables, well, is that killing you? Is those 2 extra steps going to do you? Most of you need to lose a bit of weight anyway. So is that 2 extra steps going to do you any harm? I don't think so. It loses that feel, and it's such a shame, because, even talking to some of the business owners, they're saying they're really seeing a huge effect on their business, and that's not good for the entire area.
And wasn't that many years ago, perhaps 8 or 10 years ago, where they took one of the streets in Santa Catalina, Calle Fabrica, and they closed it off, so it became a full pedestrian road.
Yeah.
And it's just chocker with restaurants on both sides, and that's another solution to something like this. And that seemed to work rather well. So it's crazy why they would do things they do, but most likely it's because someone whinged a lot.
Yeah.
And it wound somebody up. So I'm sure it'll come back.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I think sometimes governments make decisions just to justify the fact that they're in power and they've got a job, right? We haven't done anything to make anybody notice us in the last 2 years, and elections coming up soon. So let's do something that really makes an impact and gets us in the newspapers.
Of course, the two variances to that are the United States and the United Kingdom, because all you hear about is politicians. But that's another whole issue.
Oh, go on. Let's get into that. I'd love to hear your views.
No, I think we'll get that one passed. Okay.
Yeah, I actually saw something on social media the other day. It was two old women sitting on a bench, and one old woman was saying to the other, "I hear that they've granted another delay to Brexit." And she said, "Oh no, a second referendum vote for Brexit." The other old lady, she says, "Oh, good, because I was too young to vote in the last one."
I saw that, and she looked like she was 90 years old.
I know, and I thought, yeah. We'll see what happens. That's a big thing coming up here too. I mean, what is it? 10 more days, 5 more days, and we're supposed to see this big split, and nobody really knows what's going on. It blows my mind to know that we have elected officials that know less than the people do, or the same as the people do. None of us really know what's going on, and I don't think they do either. You know.
And the worst part of this, whether it's in politics or in business or anything, humans, because the way we're put together, when there's a gap in information, we tend to fill in that gap ourselves.
Yes, or Google
fill it in based on our beliefs and assumptions, which are rarely correct. And then you end up with things really running amok.
Yeah.
When all people would have to do is say, so this is truly what's going on, and have some evidence of that. And then hopefully people could make better decisions. But they're humans and they don't. And
no, do you know what? It's kind of like waking up in the middle of the night and you've got a headache and you Google it, and within 5 minutes, all of a sudden you're dying of a brain hemorrhage. And it turns out that maybe you didn't drink enough water yesterday, you know?
Yeah. It's the good news and bad news of Google, right?
Exactly. Well, and I mean, the thing too is that, we are in this age of enlightenment and the ability to do all sorts of research whenever we want on any topic we want. But we have to be aware as well that there are people out there that are making sure that their point of view is seen as fact. So you can see both points of view, and it depends on which story you come across first on Google or whatever it may be. You read that and you're like, oh yeah, I mean, this is the fact. But you may phrase the question differently, and the entirely opposite side of the opinion will come up, and you're like, well, wait a minute, this is fact. And everybody's saying what they're thinking is fact, when in essence,
exactly.
Yeah.
Years ago, when I'm old enough to remember quite a few years back, and there used to be assumptions and reality.
Yeah.
And everybody recognized, oh, so this is the reality, these are the facts. And now it seems there's multiple options of what facts are. And it bodes very poorly for countries, for populations within countries, that as long as you have this disconnect or multi-views of what reality is, it's not going to be good, and it's not going to get better.
No.
So it's a very, very sad situation. And I think we're talking about many, many years before things calm down.
Well, I mean, there's got to be a shift. Yeah. There has to be a shift straight across the board, because honestly, I mean, you take a look at politics everywhere in the world, and it's sort of the wealthy that are voting in the wealthy, and these people that are being voted in don't actually have any reality check on what it's like to live as a normal working class person. But in order to get elected, you have to have a very large marketing budget, as it were, to let the world know that you were there. Well, the only people that are going to be able to access that very large marketing budget is the wealthy, who have wealthy friends who will back them. And then what happens is that once they get elected, there's favors owed
Sure.
and so on and so forth. So this happens straight around the world. And, something's going to give at some stage, because you can't continue taking from the middle class and the poor, and the middle class that are quickly becoming poor, and not taking from the wealthy, because what they're doing is they're taking their money and they're squirreling it away somewhere in a bank and watching it grow. Whereas the rest of us are taking less and less money, and we're spending every single penny of it. But that means that there's less money out there that is being sort of, handed around. And that's got to change in order, straight all the way from politics all the way straight down. It's
For sure.
things have to change.
Because we don't learn from history really well, which is kind of sad, because if you pay any attention to history, you could not have to go too far back to think of terms of when the French Revolution came along.
Yeah.
At that point, there was this growing gap between haves and have-nots, and the gap became bigger, and the population on the bottom became bigger. And when that gap is big enough, and there's enough people down here, have-nots, they get really cranky. And when they get cranky enough, they decided to go after those people.
Yeah.
And in the French Revolution, those people just did not fare well.
No.
And there is that potential that could happen in almost any environment. If the gap gets too big, the people on the bottom will get really upset. And when people get really upset, they do things that normally they wouldn't have done. And the people on the top should pay more attention to that today before it happens.
Well, and I think part of it is that, the people on the bottom are so busy fighting, and the people on the top enjoy that. Let's throw them a bone here, and we're going to have, this special interest group be complaining about this. We'll have another special interest group complaining about this. We'll put a little bit of information out there in the ethos, as it will, and each one is going to be, going their own path, demanding a right for whatever rights they believe in at that time. And if they've got that focus, they're not going to go, wait a minute, if we all get together, we'll be able to make an impact. They're so busy fighting their own little battles that they're not cluing into the fact that they've got one big battle to fight first before they can actually even address the rest of it.
But they have to get together.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this is great. This is like being interviewed on the BBC. This is terrific.
Sorry. Well, I mean, if you're comparing me to the BBC, I'm a happy camper. That's all good for me.
There you are.
Well, darling, you know what? I am going to let you go because I know that you are busy being retired.
I think, and this sounds just terrible, but I think I've been busier being retired this time than I ever was when I was doing normal work things.
Really?
And it's because when you have a job, you have a job description, and there's explicit things you must do, and then there's implicit things you need to do to make all that happen. So your day gets pretty much filled up with stuff. Being retired, it gives you the ability, if you choose to fill in as much as you want.
Right.
And I like to keep busy, and I love to do projects. So I seem to keep on taking on more things. And if I can't do this one for some reason, well, that leaves this big a space, so I'll fill that up with two things that big. And it's good, keeps you off the streets.
You make it sound kind of exhausting, actually.
It's just not easy, but I'm struggling through.
I can see, you've got that look on your face, like, life is a bit painful. And
I think I'll write a book about this interview.
Why not, right? Well, thank you ever so much for your time. And you know what? I want to, when you come next summer for a visit, I think we ought to meet for coffee somewhere in Santa Catalina and get caught up. And you can tell me all about what you've done in the past year. But don't be a stranger. Anytime you want to come back, if you've got a new book out there, please do let us know, and we'll love to send it up.
And you keep selling those books, and better yet, you just keep buying the books, Rhea.
Right. Okay. I will. Can you give us a link that I can actually put up on my Facebook for this, where they can go specifically to purchase that book?
Amazon.com. I'll send
Okay,
you.
well, there you go. Living on Rocks. Yeah, give me the
I'll
link
send
because,
you a
you know,
link.
people are inherently lazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, if we got the link directly to the book, then they don't have to go on to Amazon and look for this book. And because those extra steps are really difficult sometimes for people.
And then even
So,
better, then we can put a link to your credit card so they can buy it with no pain at all.
right. But see, you know what? If we put a link to my credit card, it would be declined. I'm being too busy with my credit card. There ain't no room left on it for anybody else.
Okay. But I will send you a link.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you very much. Have yourself a wonderful, is it nighttime there now?
No, it's just coming on noon.
Perfect. Well, you have yourself a wonderful day, and we'll be watching you from afar. Thank you for coming on board with us, James.
Thanks, Ria. Bye.
This has been Ria with Yachting International Radio, an episode of Cava and Conversation with our guest, Dr. James B. Rieley. Stay tuned for the next episode right here on Yachting International Radio.